Greetings, my name is Crystal Wolf and I am the STEM and Health TOSA for Evergreen Public Schools. Today I'm going to be presenting on comprehensive sexual health education in the special ed context. And I'll be presenting from this slide deck, which has some embedded links that we'll be pausing from time to time to take a look at. So go ahead and take a moment and type this URL into your browser so that you have your own copy and access to the slide deck. It's going to be bit.ly/EPS_SPED. That will get you to our slide deck for today. So a little bit about me. I'm a former high school science educator, mostly at Mountain View and Union High Schools, teaching biology and environmental science. And I became the STEM and Health TOSA last year for Evergreen Public Schools. And in the last year, there have been some changes coming down from the state regarding sexual health education. And so I'm just going to be going through some of the resources today that can help us all get on the same page with what students need. So we're going to start off today with just a little thought exercise, a little welcoming ritual, if you will. And, as we start to think about human growth and development and all of the changes that our young folks go through, I just want you to take a moment to reflect about what's one thing that was exciting for you when you were growing up. Of course, there's a lot of things that are exciting about growing up. For me, I think of the time period when I was a teenager and that age of increasing independence. And for me, getting my license and being able to go out on my own with friends and have my own set of wheels, that was a really exciting time about growing up. And of course, there's a lot of responsibility that went along with that. And it was great to have my parents trust me with that. And that was something that I remember really looking forward to and enjoying during that period of time of my life. So overview of what we're going to go through today. My goals here are to make sure that everybody has an overview of what the requirements are for comprehensive sexual health education and the changes of the new law. I want to introduce you to what the curriculum is in the general education setting, as well as some resources for special ed, including the special ed flash curriculum. And what are the concepts that we teach at different grade and age levels. And then, of course, in our special ed context, we absolutely need to consider the unique needs of our learners and their families as we design the sexual health learning opportunities for all of our students in an inclusive way. So a little bit about our vision at Evergreen Public Schools. At EPS, we provide inclusive, comprehensive sexual health education that is age appropriate, and we could also say developmentally appropriate, scientifically accurate, affirms the identities of all of our students, and supports them in making healthy choices that will serve them for a lifetime. We believe that young people should have the knowledge and skills necessary to develop a healthy sense of self, to know and understand their rights, to build healthy relationships and protect themselves from sexual violence, unintended pregnancy, and sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV. Inclusive sexual health education that addresses the varied needs of each student can promote safe and supportive school environments that promote respect and empathy, both in the classroom and in the community, so that students can live fully empowered lives. There is a link here, and this is to the Guide for Sexual Health Education implementation in Washington State in 2021. So this is a resource put together by OSPI to help guide districts, building leaders, and teachers in the implementation of comprehensive sexual health education. So comprehensive sexual health education follows our OSPI K-12 Washington Health Education Standards. These standards include both nutrition, physical health, PE standards, as well as the sexual health education standards. And so if you want a more in-depth look at what the specific standards are as laid out by the state, there is a link there. One thing I do want to point out, some of these changes that are being implemented stem from Referendum 90 and Senate Bill 5395. And these new bills lay out that instruction must be age appropriate. And we could also say, especially in the special ed context, developmentally appropriate, medically and scientifically accurate, and inclusive all students. This includes our students with disabilities, as well as students of various gender and sexual orientation. Using language and strategies that recognize all members of protected classes, Instruction must be consistent with the learning standards for health education and include the following bullet points. So go ahead and take a minute to just read through those. So these bullet points are going to look a little different at each developmental or age level. I'm going to go ahead and walk through what the Gen Ed setting looks like for our sexual health education, and then we'll start to talk about special ed. So in our kindergarten through third grade classrooms, there is no sexuality content required for students in grades K through 3, but instead the instruction is in social emotional learning and building some of those foundational skills, including readiness to learn, community building, empathy, emotional management, problem solving, celebrations, and kind of all of the things that go into building relationships in a school and understanding yourself. We have our link to our social emotional learning standards here, as well as our social emotional learning webpage for Evergreen Public Schools. And so if you want to click into any of those links for more information, those are available to you. Our sexual health content really starts in grade 4 and goes all the way through senior year. And we use the FLASH curriculum as our adopted curriculum for sexual health education. And FLASH is a harm reduction model. It comes out of King County and Seattle, and it's trauma informed, and it includes strategies that are proven to reduce risk of and prevent negative health outcomes, including decreasing the risk of unintended pregnancy, STDs, including HIV, decreasing the rate of sexual violence, as well as increasing the knowledge of reproductive and sexual health and family communication about sexual health. The structure of the FLASH curriculum includes key concepts that are basically the main ideas of each lesson, and they're derived from those behavioral goals on the previous slide. We know from research that knowledge alone doesn't really change behavior and outcomes. And so the key concepts help to focus in on the beliefs, attitudes, and skills that are related to sexual behavior. Instead of memorizing large lists of facts and factual information, it's really focusing in again on those things that have actually been proven to meet those behavioral goals of sexual health education. It's based on age and level of development. And so the skills that are in the younger grades are built upon as students progress in their development. So again, the instructional approach to the FLASH curriculum is this focus on the FLASH key concepts. Again, it's teaching fewer sexual health facts and using those key concepts to frame sexual health information. So I'd like you to take a few minutes to click into the link on the FLASH key concepts and go ahead and read through those on your own. So this would be a good opportunity to pause on this video. All right, now that you've had a chance to read the FLASH key concepts, you'll notice that kind of really simplifies things. And so it's not, if you can just remember those key concepts or refer back to them, those really set the stage for the information we want students to have that is long lasting and those enduring understandings. Here's an overview of what the FLASH elementary lessons are in grades 4 through 6. And so teachers in the elementary grades, they start off with the lesson on family and self-esteem and decision-making, and then they get into consent and sexual abuse, reporting abuse, puberty, and the reproductive system. Generally, most 4th and 5th graders teach the FLASH lessons in the spring after they've developed positive relationships with their class. You'll notice in the 5th grade, there's quite a bit of repeat of the lessons. And so you see the consent and sexual abuse lesson that was in 4th grade also repeats through 5th grade and 6th grade. And 6th grade is really still using those elementary lessons. So FLASH, the way they've written their curriculum, 6th grade is included in elementary. The reason for the repetition of the lessons is that as students grow and develop in their maturity and their bodies start to change, The lessons that they had at one grade level may take on some fresh meaning and help students have some new insights about themselves and their bodies as they're going through that developmental process. And again, that timeline is unique for each student. And so having that lesson repeated in multiple grades helps to meet students where they're at in their development. In our middle school, we have the middle school lessons in the 7th and 8th grade. And our middle schools, of course, are 6th, 7th, 8th, and the lessons there are taught in the science classrooms. Many 6th grade science teachers will teach their lessons towards the beginning of the year in the fall. That's because they most closely align with a body systems unit that they teach in science. And so it makes sense to include the reproductive system as part of that. And then 7th and 8th grade, generally teachers are teaching the sexual health lessons in the spring. So they pause their science teaching to make sure that students all receive their sexual health education in 7th and 8th grade. So we've got our reproductive system and pregnancy, we've got a saying no lesson, a preventing STDs lesson, birth control, and then rules of dating in the 8th grade. And then also it's important to include local resources. You know, each state has different laws about relationships and sex, and each area has its own health resources, including sexual health resources. And so this is a document that's been put together about our local laws and our local sexual health resources that students can access if they need extra support. High school, these lessons are new for our high school this year, and our Flash High School lessons are taught in the health and medical science classes. So most 9th graders are taking a health class at some point. And then there are also students that take medical science. And so the Flash High School curriculum includes 15 lessons over the course of the 3-week unit on these various topics. And so we've got a climate setting lesson, the reproductive system and pregnancy, sexual orientation and gender identity, gender stereotypes, healthy relationships, coercion and consent, online safety and sexual violence prevention, abstinence, birth control methods, preventing HIV and other STDs, condoms to prevent pregnancy, HIV and STDs, testing for HIV and other STDs, communication and decision-making, improving school health, and again, our resource on the laws that locally that are related to sex and relationships and local health resources as well. So that's our high school overview. So depending on whatever grade level you are, I would encourage you to stop and take a quick pause and take a moment to look at what the resources are for the gen ed setting. Now, again, with our focus on inclusive sexual health education for all of our students, we realize that, you know, we have a population of students that may be in the gen ed setting that need some additional support, whether that's because they're multilingual learners or they have some disabilities or other factors that impact the way that they learn. And so we also want to make sure that our sexual health learning is inclusive of all of our students and meets our learners where they're at. And so I've included here some resources from OSPI for ways to adapt for people with developmental disabilities, and also some modified curriculum that you may find useful. So when we're talking about people with developmental disabilities, some of the practices that can be supportive would be the use of social stories that can show students how they act in situations and help them to understand social norms. Visuals are always great, not just for students with developmental disabilities, but for many of our students, including pictures and videos, can help to illustrate concepts. Using plain language, making sure that the language that we're using is simple and clear, apologies for the typo, as well as scaffolding concepts. So making sure that whenever introducing a concept, that students have learned essential foundational knowledge first. Looping through, reminding students of their previous learnings before you introduce a more complex topic is also a recommended strategy. Considering the accessibility for our students, handouts that are going to work with screen readers, have closed captioning, any other accommodations that are needed for students who might have some accessibility issues. And then also just checking in with students, right? Oftentimes our students can tell us a lot about how they like to learn, and we can trust them to help us understand how they learn best. Which brings us to our Flash secondary SPED curriculum. So Flash has a modified curriculum for secondary students who may be in special education. And you'll notice that there are categories of lessons here. We have a introduction and then a lesson that deals with private versus public. We have a category of lessons about relationships. And you'll notice that the relationship lessons go into more detail and more specifics. We also have an extensive list of lessons about communication. Instead of just a saying no lesson, we've got lessons about nonverbal communication and assertiveness and asking for what you want, and some of the components of communication that can help our students who need a little more support in those areas. We have a category with exploitation and understanding the body. We have reproduction, and again, HIV and STDs. So these lessons are designed to break down those concepts in a little more depth and to support students where they're at. So this might be another resource that you want to take a look at. In addition to the Flash Secondary Special Education curriculum, we also have some recommendations from OSPI. And so each of these links here represents another website with a bunch of resources that can help with any of our special learners who may need some modified or adapted curriculum to meet their needs for comprehensive sexual health education. So there's 4 links on this page and an additional 2 links on slide 19. This particular resource here is a recorded workshop. So teaching social sexual education to people with ASD and other developmental disabilities. So if you're interested in diving into that, that's a recording. And then there's a YouTube playlist that also has video clips for sex ed for people with developmental disabilities. So this might be another opportunity to take a pause and dive into some of those resources that are geared specifically for special education students. All right, hopefully you had a chance to look through some of those resources. Next, I want to get into some of the instructional routines for special education, or sorry, for sexual health education. And one of the really important things about sexual health is the ability for students to ask and have questions answered. What we find is that just teaching the lessons often isn't enough, but being able to ask and receive medically accurate and appropriate information is fundamental to student learning. However, student questions can really generate a lot of teacher anxiety, not knowing what students are going to ask, how to respond appropriately, what happens if a student asks a question you don't know the answer to, or a question that seems really inappropriate. What if it's a beliefs question? How do you answer those? Students can also experience a lot of anxiety in sexual health education, and one of the ways to help alleviate that is to feel confident in your teacher that they are a trusted resource and that they do have your best interests in mind and are there to help you learn and make smart decisions. So being able to ask and answer questions can also generate student anxiety, but it can also be a source of relief if those questions are received appropriately and by a trusting adult. It helps students to learn that they can learn things by asking questions. So there are many effective strategies for answering student questions. And this next section is going to walk through some of those strategies and also give you some resources to go back to later. So in sexual health education, we often use an anonymous question box. This could be a physical question box in your room where students have slips of paper. This can also be a Google form. Just make sure that you assure students that you will collect that information and not share who wrote the questions if you're doing that electronically. In the general education setting, this is the recommended setup. You want to clearly explain what everybody will be doing. And in order to alleviate that anxiety of, am I the only person putting a question in the box, what teachers will often do is they'll give each student an identical piece of paper and ask them all to use, say, a pencil or a black pen, so that even just the writing on the paper is somewhat anonymous, no names on those pieces of paper. At the end of the so every student gets a piece of paper, every student writes something down, even if it's not a question. You collect it at the end of the lesson. And again, if a student doesn't have a question, they can write down a topic that they would like more info on, or they could write down something they learned. But this ensures that every student feels like they have a safe opportunity to ask that question without being singled out or identified. And this process really, again, builds trust. It models respectful communication. It helps to address dangerous misinformation and get students the facts that they need. In answering the questions, oftentimes I recommend to teachers that you answer the questions you receive the next day. This gives you as a teacher the chance to read through the questions, to formulate your answers and your approach, and gives you some time to reach out to a colleague if there's a question you're just not sure about how to answer. So when we go about answering student questions, we use what's called the AIM model. We want to affirm the asker. We want to inform and provide information. We want to make sure that the question is answered, or we make a referral to somebody else who can answer that question. There are several question types that you will probably receive. And so we've broken those into categories, and each category has a little bit of a different strategy. This link here in yellow gives you kind of a more comprehensive overview of each of these types of questions. But for our purposes today, I'm just going to go through a quick overview. So for a factual question where a student is really just asking for information, you're going to follow that AIM model. You're going to affirm the questioner, provide the information, and make sure that you've answered the question. Now, sometimes you'll get a personal question, and these can be questions that may feel inappropriate, but one of the things that we want to acknowledge is that oftentimes a personal question is really just a student asking for information. And so it's an opportunity to model clear, respectful boundaries and answer the question in a more generic way. So, for example, one of the example questions that's a personal question that students might ask is, when did you first have sex? And that's a really personal question, and it's a question that a teacher shouldn't answer directly. But what that question might be asking is really a student wondering about when is the right age to have sex. And so you can answer that in a values-based way, which we'll cover in the next section. And you can model the respectful boundary of, thank you for asking that question. I'm not going to share with you when I first had sex. That would be a boundary invasion, so I'm going to keep that private. But I think what you're asking is a little bit more about when is it appropriate and what are some of the things to consider. And so you can go through the values protocol, which we'll get to in a second, to continue answering those personal questions. Slang questions, again, can often feel inappropriate when they're asked, but we can reframe that question into a teachable moment, and we can help students understand the implications of their words and how they're used and what the appropriate term can be. So you really want to lean into some of those teachable moments if you get a slang question about a term that might be offensive or inappropriate. Sometimes students answer or ask questions purely for shock value. And one of the things here is that students can be sort of testing a teacher to see, how you're going to respond and react. And so with shock questions, we treat them as any other question. We still affirm the questioner. We, in the question, try to uncover what is a piece of information that is useful and is helpful that can be provided as an answer to that question. And that also establishes your ability to handle those questions. Sometimes students will get a technique question. This is often a question that stems from normal student curiosity. Again, we have to model some healthy boundaries there. We can't teach a young person how to have sex or how to engage in a technique. That would be, inappropriate. And so we have to remind our students that this is not a how-to class. We model respectful, inclusive language. We can answer any factual information, but we don't provide information about techniques. And then we get to our values question protocol after that. So you might want to pause right now and click into this yellow link to get a little bit more information about those categories of questions and how to approach each of those types of questions. Okay, so we've gone through the first 5 categories of question types you might receive. Next, we're going to go into some practice questions. So these are the 5 categories of questions that you might receive from students, and again, those strategies for answering each type. And we also have some practice slides on the next, some practice questions on the next slide. And so one of the things that can really build your confidence as an instructor is thinking through some of the commonly asked questions that you might receive and being able to practice those with a trusted colleague. So here below is a link to some practice questions. You can probably also think of some others you might expect students to ask you, and you can take a few minutes to think through what you might do to respond to that question, what category it's in, what information you can provide, how you might, again, affirm that asker and make sure you've answered the part of the question that you can. All right, let's get into the 6th type of question, which is values questions. So again, our role as educators in a public education setting is to provide medically accurate, scientifically accurate public health information for students. Our job is not to tell students what to believe or their families. And so on occasion, you will get questions that relate to values. And so we have a specific framework for answering those questions that are about beliefs and values. This can sometimes be challenging for teachers. We have to sort of check our own bias and our own values and beliefs and make sure that we are honoring the wide range of beliefs that may be held by our families and our students. One of the things that we can do, however, is to encourage our participants to explore their own values in a healthy way. Now, there are some values that are universal values, and we identify universal values as being supported by the vast majority of society. These values might be supported by laws. They can and do change over time, but they are necessary to uphold the safety and health of young people. And we do have a social and moral obligation to teach universal values. So there are some universal values that we do need to acknowledge and make sure that we are reinforcing. And one of those is forcing someone to have sex with you is wrong. So if a student asks a question, that's a values question, but it relates to this universal value, we can emphasize that universal value. It's also a universal value to that knowingly just spreading a disease that can harm other people is wrong. It's also a universal value that it is never safe or healthy for an adult to be sexual with a minor, and forcing someone to have sex is also wrong. There are also a wide range of values that are non-universal values. And so all of these other values are things that we want to be a little more careful and sensitive to as we're teaching sexual health. So some examples of non-universal values would be abortion, cohabitation, whether it's okay or not to live with a partner before you're married, birth control, what kind of birth control, when to use birth control, how to use birth control, what age or under what circumstances it is okay to have sex, tampon use, shaving, masturbation, and sex outside of marriage. So when we get questions that relate to some of these non-universal values, we have a way to respond to that can still provide factual information and facilitate respectful discussion. In that discussion, we can explore the range of values or feelings that people may have about that topic in our community, and then we can refer students to their family to share their values and to other trusted adults. One of the things we want to model is showing respect for the diversity of opinions that exist within our community, and we also want to adhere to our group agreements about respect and safety. Again, it's not our place as educators to teach non-universal values to students. We want to support a family's right to share their values with their children, as well as any other trusted adults that are part of that student's community and community circle. So, how will you know if you are getting asked a question that is about values? Oftentimes, a question that is about values might include words like good, okay, bad, should, right, or wrong. That kind of clues you into the fact that this question might be a judgment question. So an example might be, is abortion okay? Is masturbation okay? Those sorts of questions are, again, those non-universal values questions. Even though it's a non-universal value, we can still share factual information. So we want to make sure that when we answer a question that's a values question, that we take that opportunity to make sure that all students have the same understanding of factual information. So if I was answering a question of, is abortion okay? I might say something like, well, abortion, whether it's okay or not, is really a values question. And we have a wide range of beliefs in our community about whether abortion is okay. Have you, as a student, heard about any of those beliefs? And what beliefs do people have around abortion? You can open up a class discussion. We can also define what abortion is. We can say, okay, so abortion is when a woman makes a choice to terminate a pregnancy or to end a pregnancy. And people access abortion for a variety of reasons. Some people believe that it's never okay to have an abortion. Some people believe that it's okay to have an abortion in the case of sexual abuse or rape or incest. Some people believe it's okay to have an abortion if it's medically necessary because a woman's life is in danger from the pregnancy. And some people believe that it's okay to have an abortion for other reasons. So you can establish that range of beliefs and provide information about what abortion is without making a judgment call. Again, educators should not share their personal belief about abortion. And so as we, again, go through that process of affirming the asker, identifying the informational part of the question that we can answer, answering the informational part, and also describing the range of values, we can model that respect. Now, as far as answering that values part, we refer students to trusted adults in their lives. So this might be their parents or guardians, it might be a clergy member or another trusted adult. We want to make sure that students know where to go to get the rest of that question answered in a way that's respectful of families. So again, there is that values question protocol with another example question. Is it okay for teens to have sex? So again, you can affirm the asker and validate the question. This is a really common question. Thank you for asking this. This is a question that a lot of students that are your age might have. So when we answer this question, we want to make sure to identify that the question is a values question. So answering this question, I might say, so this question has to do with someone's values or beliefs about when it's okay for teens to have sex. So we do know that there is some factual information we can share here. On average, less than half of young people have sex before the age of 18. So it's very common for teens to also choose to not have sex. And there's a range of beliefs about what people believe or think about if it's okay. So some people think that it is okay for teens to have sex, that it's normal and okay, but it might be better to wait until you're older. Some people think it's best to wait until you are old enough to have the responsibility of a baby if you would become pregnant and make those decisions. Some people believe it's not okay for teens to have sex and that they should wait till they have married, till they're married. What are some other beliefs that you know about that people have about teens having sex? And you can also share some factual information. It's never okay for a teen to have sex with an adult. So there's that universal value. Again, you can refer to a trusted adult to help that student know who to go to answer the beliefs part of the question. So when thinking about if it's okay for teens to have sex, it can be really helpful to talk to an adult that you trust, whether that's your parents or a clergy member or another trusted adult in your family, to help understand what your family's beliefs are about when it's the right age to have sex. Okay, so that's a little bit about that flash values question protocol. Again, that's a really quick overview. I'll link some additional resources on this slide if you want to dive into that deeper. So if you want to take some time to go back to those questions and sample questions, that might be a good time to pause this video. All right, a little bit about logistics. So when we teach comprehensive sexual health education, it's really important to inform families and to provide information and also an opportunity for parents to opt their students out if they so choose. The state law requires that students who are going to receive sexual health education, that their families receive notice of the lessons 1 month in advance of instruction. So I've got some sample letters linked here for our elementary, middle, and high school notification letters. Again, we always want to make sure to let families know and communicate clearly what our curriculum is. And then we also have an opt-out form. So for a variety of reasons, parents may opt out of a specific lesson that they just don't feel comfortable with, or they may end up opting out of a whole package of lessons, and they can do that through the opt-out form that's on our public webpage. So you might want to take a look at those resources. Another resource are our web pages. We have a teacher-facing web page that includes links to some of our copyrighted materials. You can find this in your Evergreen bookmarks on the EPS Science-based webpage, or there's a direct link here. And then we also have a public-facing web page for families. And so if you have a family that is wanting more information about the curriculum, they can find a lot of that information on the link to our public-facing webpage. So with that, there's a lot of resources there. I want to make sure to give an opportunity for, with whatever remaining time that you have today, to do some planning and thinking through what this might look like in your classroom and in your context. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, your special ed coordinator might be a great person to reach out to for some additional support. I'm also available as well. Again, my background is more in the gen education setting. So if there's any questions that are kind of in that realm, feel free to reach out to me either by email or by phone.